I now want to take this opportunity to introduce Linda Adams. Linda, as many of you know, is a former secretary of CalEPA. She's very instrumental in the passage of AB 32 that set California on the path it is currently along. I'm also pleased to remind the audience that she is the chair of the board of the Climate Action Reserve, and we really appreciate the leadership and guidance that she provides to our organization. So, Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Craig, and good morning, everyone. It's my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome our first keynote speaker for Navigating the American Carbon World 2017. As many of you know, this conference is about innovation, leadership, and dedication to advancing solutions. Given this, I could not think of a more fitting speaker to kick off this year's event. California State Controller Betty Yee has more than 30 years of experience in public service, and that's how long I've known Betty. As the state's Chief Fiscal Officer, her primary job is safeguarding taxpayer dollars. Her work also supports the protection of our environment. Controller Yee takes pride in her roles protecting California's vital natural resources and coastline, advancing the shift to clean energy, and modernizing state transportation systems. As a member of the State Lands Commission, she helps provide stewardship of public trust lands and restoration consistent with the state's environmental needs. In her very important position as State Controller, Ms. Yee serves as a board member of the nation's two largest public pension funds, California Public Employees Retirement System, CalPERS, and the California State Teachers Retirement System. Combined, these two have an investment portfolio of nearly $500 billion. Under Betty's leadership, last year, both boards amended the board director attributes in their corporate governance policies to specifically include expertise and experience in climate change risk management strategies. So please join me in welcoming State Controller Betty Yee.
Thank you, Linda, very much. Good morning, everyone. And welcome, and I am very, very excited to be here to kick off this day. And you know, it's really a privilege to serve as the CFO for the sixth largest economy in the world. And in that capacity, I am just really deeply committed to continuing our state's leadership and building on the 15 years of work that we are all here to be sure we further. Obviously, we know we are doing this against a backdrop of what's happening at the federal level. And I'm just here to first affirm that not only are we standing up to President Trump, but probably more importantly, California is standing up in support of sound science. And this is something that is just a no-brainer for us. And that's what's going to continue to guide our work. So we must build on AB 32 and SB 32 in responsibly reducing our state's and our nation's dependence on carbon and fossil fuels. You know, the fact of the matter is when we engage corporations, what we're finding is that corporations don't want to go back and reverse efforts on climate change. By continuing to hold the private sector accountable, we can prevent larger scale rollbacks, and that is possible. As Linda mentioned, I serve on the boards of our nation's two largest pension funds, CalPERS and CalSTRS. And together, both funds have a deep commitment to being sure that we are at the forefront of combating global climate change. Now, obviously, our first priority as pension fund board members must always be our fiduciary duty. Our stakeholders are more than 2.7 million California state employees, teachers, and retirees who depend on us for their retirement income security. There is, however, complete total organization buy-in by both funds at the board and at the staff levels to ensure that pension investments are climate appropriate. Both funds strive to be leaders in advocating for environmental, social, and governance considerations and investment decisions. And in fact, CalPERS was a founding signatory to the Principles for Responsible Investing in 2006, the investor initiative that advocates for ESG practices in partnership with the United Nations, and CalSTRS joined the PRI a year later. Now, many of us recognize that investment decisions that do not take into account the sustainability of our natural resources or the health of our planet do not benefit our members. And the Sustainable Development Goals laid out by the United Nations run the gamut from eliminating poverty and hunger to climate action and clean energy. Our pension funds share those values, and I look forward to seeing them embraced on a more global level. I want to just talk a little bit about some of the things as California CFO. First of all, I just have to say I love my job. I really love my job. But what I will say about the work that I do is that there is no area of policy that I touch that doesn't have some connection to climate change. Whether it's housing policy, tax policy, any kind of financial policy, this is the threshold public policy. So as California CFO, as Linda mentioned, I also serve on numerous finance committees that allocate funding and tax credits for major infrastructure projects. And tax credits can be a very valuable tool for encouraging green building and advancing the development of green energy technologies. Tax credit-funded projects don't always make the best investment vehicles for public pension funds, however. But as an example, most solar plants are financed using tax credits, and those credits greatly reduce a private investor's costs. Public pension funds are exempt from taxes on earnings, so this type of investment usually doesn't pencil out for CalPERS and CalSTRS. But we are trying to get creative about these opportunities, and this is really the fun part of my job, is how to be creative. And so you wouldn't think that working with numbers can be all that creative, but it is so very creative. At CalPERS, we purchased an ownership stake in a company called Desert Sunlight that operates 2 solar photovoltaic power facilities near Palm Springs. The plants have a combined capacity of 550 megawatts for sale to California utility companies. In this case, the pricing looked good because the tax credits were exhausted. We're looking at other direct ownership opportunities as opposed to the current practice of going through an investment management firm. One approach might be to buy a company that can take advantage of the tax credits and use that firm to invest in tax credit finance energy assets. Now, much has been written, and even this week as the CalPERS Board of Administration met, about the distinction between engaging with our companies as compared to divesting from them. The board and managers at CalPERS and CalSTRS believe in the environmental, social, and governance standards, and is now part of the culture and shared mindset at both funds. In 2015, CalPERS analyzed the carbon footprint report of its 10,000 global equity holdings. Not all firms provide reports, so CalPERS estimated the data for 30% of the firms by portfolio value. And of the 10,000 holdings, 100 companies accounted for 50% of the carbon emissions for the entire global equity portfolio. 100 companies. 1/3 of firms by value of CalPERS holdings have absolute greenhouse gas reduction targets publicly reported to the Carbon Disclosure Project. Some of those companies are among the top 10 emitters, and the total carbon emissions reduction pledged by those companies would reduce CalPERS public equity emissions by 6%. And as a member of the boards for not just CalPERS and CalSTRS, but more recently for Ceres, I am encouraged by the engagement with companies to reduce carbon emissions and look forward to fostering more partnerships and holding on to our voice at the investor table. This is why we don't divest. In addition to the fact that both funds are severely underfunded. But Ceres and CalPERS are planning a new effort, and at the Ceres conference next week right here in San Francisco, I will be introducing the Global 100 Initiative, where we intend to recruit other institutional investors to encourage corporations to develop and implement sustainability plans to decrease carbon impacts. The companies are in CalPERS Global Equity Portfolio, which is an index, so many institutional investors have stakes in these companies as well. I will introduce the project next week at Ceres and encourage you to learn more and follow our progress. We plan to conduct the same type of analysis for the fixed income portfolio and complete that evaluation in 2018. And if we can't measure it, then we can't engage it. And this is what we are really pushing for, is to be able to measure and using the standards that are underway by the Sustainability Standards Accounting Board. And corporations soon will be able to measure use of carbon and overall sustainability. Then I believe as investors, we can target companies to engage. And I just want to say on a related note, aside from amending both of our corporate governance policies to include climate competency on corporate boards, CalSTRS committed $2.5 billion to a low carbon index fund last July. And we are continuing to be diligent about where to place those investments, but this is the start, and it is a commitment that we will continue to sustain. Investment funds identify those targets and can push for proxy votes with stakeholder proposals on sustainability and reporting, and we're in proxy season right now. CalPERS supports shareholder resolutions filed by peers demanding from considerable CO2 polluters, so-called systemically important carbon emitters, to assess their transition to 2 degrees Celsius investing scenarios. Now, we don't do this alone. We do this in many, many partnerships, but I just want to call out our specific partnership at CalPERS with the New York State City Controller, Scott Stringer, and we have supported shareholder resolutions requesting proxy access to nominate company directors at Charles Schwab, at Waters Corporation, IBM, Humana, and Packard Incorporated. And while it may be difficult to get a majority vote on such a proposal, companies are taking note. And we are going to get to that point, I am confident, in the next year or so. In 2013, CalSTRS targeted 100 companies in the Russell 1000 index portfolio that lacked sufficient disclosure of energy and water use management. More than 30 companies responded with evidence of their desire to either release efficiency efforts or consider alternative approaches. And both funds increased engagement with companies to encourage fossil fuel valuation. So the push has been happening. The push continues to be strong. Companies are responding, and we hope to have more robust reporting as each proxy season comes upon us. Subsequent proxy access proposals that many companies engaged by CalSTRS and CalPERS won a majority of support, including Neighbors Industries, Chesapeake Energy, Verizon Communications, CenturyLink Incorporated, Abercrombie & Fitch, Darden Restaurants, International Game Technology, Boston Properties, Big Lots, and SLM Corporation. I love naming these corporations because I'm not afraid of shaming some. So, many pension funds across the country invest in the same companies through index investments, and that provides a valuable division of labor for engagement. We can't do it all alone, and these partnerships are so, so important. So the fight against climate change, yes, it takes time, but frankly, that is the most urgent of our issues before us. But we've already achieved significant incremental change. For example, oil companies heard the call for change, and many now refer to themselves as energy companies. In particular, British Petroleum and Shell agreed to back shareholder proposals on climate risk reporting following CalPERS' work with a coalition of investors engaging fossil fuel companies on climate change. BP dedicated $8 billion to its alternative energy business and 20% of its R&D to low-carbon transition. As a result of CalPERS' engagement, Shell started a $21 billion biofuel joint venture with Brazil's Cosan. The fact that companies are making changes is a great success for funds that value sustainability. And we hope to have many, many more who will be joining us in this effort moving forward. Probably very different from most of the work that I do is the work that I so enjoy as a member of the California State Lands Commission. And I have the great privilege of chairing that commission in even number years. At the State Lands Commission, we manage tidelands, submerged lands, and waterways from 3 miles off the Pacific coast in the west to Lake Tahoe in the east, as well as sovereign lands granted in trust to local jurisdictions and lands granted by Congress to support schools. We work to protect and enhance these lands and natural resources by issuing leases for use or development, promoting public access, and implementing regulatory programs to shield state waters from oil spills and invasive species introductions. In the year leading up to my 2016 leadership of state lands, I was proud to bring together representatives with a wide array of perspectives on land use policy, convening leaders in business, in energy production, environmental community, advocates for public access, and Native Californians whose ancestors lived here long before the gold rush. And together we agreed on a wide-ranging 5-year strategic plan for the State Lands Commission, the first strategic plan agreed upon in the Commission's history. California's ports are among the public trust lands under the Commission's purview. And as we all know, ports are critical to our state's economy, and sea level rise directly affects them. The State Lands Commission also provides an opportunity to evaluate strategies for adaptation, and climate change and sea level rise present the threat of economic and environmental hazards that we must confront now. Chronic flooding of connecting railway and highways and open storage areas, reduced bridge clearance, liquefaction of soils, dispersion of buried contaminants, and climate change, as we all know, can bring more intense storms, which could mean delayed deliveries and departures, more ship-wharf collisions, as well as damage to wharfs, piers, and buildings, undermined pavements and foundations, more intense river runoff, and the opening of Arctic shipping routes that take away business from California ports. We can reduce carbon in California through cap and trade, but erosion and high tides require aggressive action too. King tides, which happen twice a year and can reach nearly 15 feet high, are the highest possible tides. These tides provide a glimpse of future everyday water levels and are a way to communicate local sea level rise impacts over long periods. Low-lying shoreline development is at an increased risk of flooding because of rising seas, and public investments in infrastructure, housing, and habitat restoration projects last for decades. By highlighting king tides in a community, we can raise awareness of potential sea level rise impacts and identify flood-prone locations. And community leaders need to understand the impacts sea level rise has on local resources. Hurricane Sandy is just one example and a prime example of what can happen with king tides. In 2015, the California Coastal Commission approved an effort to replenish sand on Broad Beach in Malibu, and that is an effort to maintain the beach in the face of king tides. Both adaptation and reduction are part of the equation, and adaptation is the newest policy area in which we can prepare for what is inevitable. Sea level rise will infringe on public access to coastal resources and cede state property rights to private entities. The legal sovereign land boundary will move landward with the mean high tide, and the call to protect private property will become increasingly urgent. And we take this actually very seriously. The calls for public access and private ownership of some of these properties is giving us great pause with respect to how some of these issues will be resolved, and we certainly do not intend to have them elevate to the United States Supreme Court. So under our 5-year strategic plan, the Commission incorporated a strategy for addressing climate change into all planning, analysis, and decisions. So we must and we will incorporate strategies to adapt the reality of sea level rise and to reduce the risk by moving to both a green energy economy and a blue economy. And we must and will incentivize water conservation and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In addition to climate risks such as sea level rise, at state lands, we focus on the many opportunities we have identified to be part of the climate solution. We are increasing our renewable energy development and facility portfolio while responsibly managing existing energy production and development leases. When I had the opportunity to chair state lands last year, the Commission made great strides in promoting, facilitating, and developing renewable energy resources on the lands under our jurisdiction. Last June, we authorized 2 new leases for Pacific Gas and Electric Company's Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant. The extension to 2025 will take the plant to the end of its federal licensing period and allow a timely commission of the state's last nuclear power facility. PG&E agreed with environmental advocates and labor to replace the plant's energy capacity with a portfolio of greenhouse gas-free resources and provide 55% of total resales from eligible renewables. In October, the Commission authorized our first renewable energy development project further south in California. The Tule Wind 2 project involves the development of 7 wind turbines, generating up to 21 megawatts of electricity on 640 acres of school lands in eastern San Diego County. The project is part of phase 2 of a larger wind farm. In addition to these obvious environmental benefits, the development will generate at least $135,000 in annual rent with the possibility of additional royalties for the state. And all of this revenue generated will benefit the California State Teachers Retirement System, supporting the retirement security of our public school teachers. The State Lands Commission also owns land with geothermal potential. We lease out land for geothermal production in the geysers area of Sonoma County and Lake County. We also are exploring production options in the Truck Haven area by the Salton Sea in Imperial County. And Commission staff recently completed a draft evaluation of geothermal potential of school lands located near the state's known geothermal resource areas. So we will continue we will continue to evaluate the data, identify the school land parcels that exhibit suitable geothermal potential for development and leasing opportunities. In December, we adopted a resolution strongly supporting the Obama administration's ban on new offshore oil drilling off the Pacific coast and supporting the prioritization of responsible renewable energy development. We want President Trump to know the Commission and California's leaders are continuing our active role in protecting our coastline, and we are not going back. When I became chair of the commission, I made it a priority to seek out unique partnerships and to advance our goals with protection of our critical environmental resources right at the top of the list. I am proud to say in my first year as chair, we entered into a multitude of collaborations and partnerships, all of which address impacts from sea level rise and climate change. They include the San Diego Marine Spatial Planning with the Port of San Diego, the San Francisco Waterfront Working Group, the Lake Tahoe Shoreline Steering Committee, the West Coast Regional Planning Body, and the U.S. Bureau of Ocean Energy Management Offshore Renewable Energy Task Force. In fact, all state lands leases that are vulnerable to sea level rise from 2016 forward will include special provisions. Factors include more frequent maintenance and visual inspection of authorized improvements in the wake of major weather events. I just have to say, we applaud the work of the State Lands Commission staff, where all of the work is driven by sound science. I want to just also applaud the courts and its recent decision to uphold our cap and trade program in California. This is... It gives us a chance now to really be more broad with respect to what is happening with our climate. If residents and policymakers can see clean air initiatives in their neighborhoods, the impact is more tangible than investments in other parts of the world. And similarly, by combating short-lived climate pollutants like those from cars, we can take direct steps to reduce the impact on communities. And this will be something that we take very seriously as we look at parts of California that have, frankly, been ignored with any of these policies applying to them. And in the work that I do, where everything is all about the economy, we don't need climate change to further exacerbate our high levels of poverty here in California, as well as helping to, unfortunately, further the income inequality divide. So, what I want to say to you, and as you begin this day, is that California can be both a responsible investor and ensure sustainability for the state in years to come. It's not a question of either or, it is an imperative of both and. And when we look at the work ahead of us, I just have to say I'm so pleased to be doing this work with tremendous leaders, both in the public and private sector. But first, and I'm so happy that he will be joining you here today, I can't say enough about the tremendous leadership and the voice and international voice that our Governor Brown is giving to this very threshold issue. So thank you, Governor Brown, for your tremendous, tremendous leadership and vision. To long-standing leaders like Mary Nichols, who has just really championed cap and trade and continues to be the national and international voice on this front. To leaders like Linda Adams, who continues to sustain her involvement in this space. But to both of our legislative leaders, who have obviously spent a lot of political capital getting to the point of where California has the most aggressive renewable energy goals. And again, we are not going back. And so all of this just to say that we are here for the long term. President Trump, we have no intention of stepping back. And in fact, we are standing here and gathered here in California this morning, Mr. President, 2 days ahead of Earth Day 2017. And I believe you will be witness to the March for Science on Saturday as part of Earth Day festivities. And I just want to close by saying that we could not do all of this work. And I had the great pleasure of speaking at a climate symposium to about 700 scientists about 2 months ago. And just how dejected they felt about, certainly the policies that were coming out of Washington, and how demoralizing it must be that you spend your career and dedicate your life to just, using your discipline to further the goals of just trying to save our planet. But what has just been such a great development is that our scientists are becoming our greatest activists. And I hope all of you will leave here feeling like you can be part of that activist family. We value science. It's science that has informed us about the threats and the effects of global climate change in all of our communities. It's science that has instilled the ethic in all of us that we can do more each day to save our planet. And frankly, it's science that's going to continue to inspire us with the new solutions and strategies for what will be created that will help curb the destruction of our sky and our forests and our oceans. So I just want to say to all of you, let our March for Science just not begin and end with Earth Day on Saturday, April 22nd. May it be our mission and calling each and every single day. Welcome to San Francisco. Thank you.